Happy 2026 and welcome back to another episode of Gaia Gossip, a podcast production hosted by Her Many Voices Foundation. I'm your host, Mary Jane Oatman, and I'm joining you all today with a very special guest out of the Algonquin First Nations community in Canada. Josée Bourgeois is an actress, model, dancer, and activist that has very much impacted my worldview in bringing down the border for the Indigenous cannabis work that we do together collectively. But I just want to just give a moment for Josée to just share a little bit about her background before we just dive deep into this interview, to just share a little bit more from her perspective about herself.
Thank you so much, MJ. Kwe kakina Josée Indigenous Pequawkinagan and Dojaban Anishinaabe Kwe Anishinaabe Aki. Hello, my name is Josée. I'm a proud Algonquin woman on my ancestral Algonquin territory of Pequawkinagan. I wear many hats, but what I'm really here today is under the work that I've been doing in the sovereign cannabis industry since late 2019 to present. Started working as a community engagement manager, doing brand development for some sovereign products, and then that all evolved into advocacy in the sovereign cannabis space and the regulated cannabis space to be advocating about inherent Indigenous rights.
Well, thank you so much for joining us. Now, while we both have a lot of shared work and mission in the cannabis industry, I know that your background and your pathway into this advocacy is very robust. And so we're going to have a discussion about all kinds of amazing things because we are in winter in our Indigenous communities, which is a season of storytelling. It's always such a privilege for me to be able to share stories with a sister and fellow matriarch. So I really wanted to just kind of dive into this conversation specifically because of the work that we do together about advancing visibility. Visibility for our often marginalized and unrepresented communities. So, I guess my first question to kind of fire away at you is kind of as an Indigenous representative, in First Nations communities that has ventured over into the pathway of mainstream media. How do you really find balance between that visibility and the introduction of cultural authenticity to really replace the mimicry that has been happening for our cultures in mainstream media?
I think your genuine personality, your genuine virtues will dictate your ability to be able to find a pathway in any of those intersections that you just mentioned, especially within the cannabis space. I think for me, I can say that almost every single thing that I've done in my life has been a natural evolution from one thing into another, into another, into another. And I haven't at all really yet had to stop the bus, get off, and go to a completely different station and take a different route. I haven't had to do that yet. So, modeling, dancing turned into modeling, went back to dancing, turned into big performance career that I created on my own, completely by myself. And that's a whole other conversation of, capacity to network and visibility. But it came from a place of moving back to my Ottawa area and having an understanding that in my late life at 30 years old is when I found my way back home, more or less. And looking around the city of Ottawa, it's the capital of this country. And the home nation is my father's ancestors, the Algonquin people. And in the city of Ottawa, you have so much going on, which is obviously like the hub of government here, but it's also an arts hub. And I took a look around very quickly when I first moved back here. I had a young son, I was a single mom, and I didn't want to do a 9 to 5. I wanted to be an artist, I wanted to be a dancer. And I looked at the National Arts Center and I made a manifestation. And, so that kind of determination also mirrored itself years later, coming into the cannabis industry, having a very clear understanding right away that there was a regulated industry, that there was a government expectation for us to not be visible. And that made me feel some type of ways, and having an understanding of what inherent rights are, and having the understanding that this is just another form of oppression, just another form of making us invisible by not including us into the Cannabis Act. And just through natural evolution of doing this job and knocking on the doors of conference spaces in the regulated industry, and noticing that there would be maybe one booth out of the hundreds, at these big conferences, like, regardless, doesn't matter if it's Grow Up or Can Expo or Oh Cannabis, didn't matter which one. There would only ever be these like one guys, right? And then you would realize that, well, they're there because they went through a license route through the government. They weren't exercising sovereignty. And so it only took me one conference to look around and say, well, who the hell is talking about the sovereign industry here in the regulated industry? Because clearly we're your guys' biggest competitors, especially in Canada. Like, it's really black and white. And just coming into the industry right away and just seeing what the potential economically was and what the exponential growth was, it made no sense that there was no discussion about the sovereign industry. And either it's just like, la, 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 they don't exist, or it was like, we don't want them here, so I took a big chance either way and knocked on a lot of doors and said, hey guys, so let's talk about the sovereign industry. Let's have a panel, let's have a presentation, do something on your agenda, show that you guys are not, shutting the door and just talking shit about us, because you don't know, right? All of the understanding is going to be based, quote unquote, understanding about the sovereign industry is going to be based on stereotypes and stigmas, on top of the fact that we're not even included in the Cannabis Act. So there is no language for people to have a lens and understand. It's all just opinions, and quite truthfully harmful opinions.
Well, it just really makes me think of the power of representation and just that concept of, one stone thrown and the ripple effect of that stone. Because I sit here very much a part of the downstream ripple of you throwing that stone, Joseph. And
Mm.
it
Vice
makes me
versa,
emotional to
Mary
even think
Jane.
about.
Vice versa, girl. Seriously, 100%.
Because it was in 2017 when I started working more robustly in protecting the rights and interests of tribes here stateside, with the states legalizing cannabis and different initiatives moving at the federal level. I was running that parallel to what was happening with the Cannabis Act. And when I realized that First Nations communities not only were being left out, they were purposefully being lobbied against and left out, that I decided to really step things up here in organizing our tribal nations, our communities, and our families, because that was the other thing that I recognized, was that this can't always be about corporate monopolies of our governments, whether they be tribal governments or federal governments, provincial or state governments. The families, where's voice for family, and the narrative for our families and storytelling, because that's where I see a lot of that repair going, with that power of representation that brings in Indigenous identity and storytelling. And you are just so perfect for that, having that background in film, television, and theater, because you also had a community there. So can you just share a little bit more about how that uh, community of artisans helped inspire or encourage you into the cannabis side? Because I know here that's a big part of what has maintained the subculture of this plant medicine.
Mhm. Artists get away with saying things that on other platforms and in ways other people just don't. They get judged and they get scrutinized. Artists are almost uplifted for their views and their ability to call out the sickness in the world. And so what started through dance and making experimental films at the same time of getting into the cannabis, and I've always had the two tracks going. My life has always, there's always been a dancing track, and then there's been other things going on, you know, and sometimes they complement each other. So I think I built a nerve a long time ago. Also being hired for gigs in the city of Ottawa to open culturally, and knowing a very long time ago, don't ever let anyone introduce you, especially when it comes to these cultural type of events. So right from the very beginning, just a long time ago, I just started taking a microphone and I started looking at the suits in the room and the watches in the room and the champagne in the room and all that stuff, and the, you know, the corporate ears in the room, and understanding that I'm being paid to be here to represent who I am as an Algonquin person. Well, you're going to hear what I have to say. You thought I was here to just do a pretty little dance? No. You know, and so that just built a nerve for myself, and I was always uplifted. There was always women at the end of the day, non-native as well, mostly even, who would come and just validate the message that I was carrying. And then I started to realize I shouldn't have to just be an artist. I'm an Indigenous woman. So now I'm going to start speaking through the lens of an Indigenous woman, because I'm not going to have the artist mask with me in the cannabis industry. It's business, right? And it's a cultural consultation representation all the time. And so I think for me, there's something in my blood DNA. I'm half white. My mom's French Canadian. My mom's bourgeois side of the family. They're all Jehovah Witnesses. So there's something in my dad's bloodline, you know, that is in me that has given me this fire, this bravery. And I don't have a lot to lose. I don't have a big family. I don't have the pressure of, you know, people in my community or in my family telling me to shh, don't say those things, you know. I just don't have that. So I'm kind of a lone soldier. I march to the beat of my own drum. And in this space, that's dangerous for people who don't want to hear uncomfortable truths.
You know, I love that how you shared, and I'm a guy like goosebumps, because you kind of like almost like in the Nimipu or the Nez Perce, our creation, we have a trickster, and it's Coyote, and Coyote's just like usually bungling things, messing things up, but at the same time, when Coyote is instructed to listen to the matriarchs, he creates our people. And so I'm thinking about like just, like how sometimes we have to come in as a trickster and find a back door with the mask on, and then, come in and challenge those stereotypes and tropes about gender identity, ethnic and racial identity. But seeing how you did that as an artisan, as a matriarch, and an indigenous woman, and as you said, in a business industry where everything is about an ROI, and
Mm.
that ROI has to be something tangible and
Mhm.
monetary, and you just like completely blew that door open,
But you know what,
utilizing
Mary
like
Jane?
media for cultural
Yeah.
preservation.
It would be really important, though, to mention that my foundation of everything really came when I found powwow dancing. Like, and that brings the dial way back, you know? And I'm not talking about as an 8-year-old girl jumping around for the first time. That's all I'm talking about. I'm talking about waking up one day and realizing I don't like who I am. I don't like my life. It's empty. How do I fix this? How do I my father's a 60 scoop baby, grandmother residential school survivor. So the effect of the lack of cultural retention was real. There was never going to be anybody knocking on my door, aunts, uncle, cousins, anything like that, asking me if I want to dance. So I had to teach myself everything, long story short, but finding the circle and then really living that life authentically. Like, I left the city life behind and I moved to a reservation, and it's been 17, 18 years and I've never looked back. You know, I grew up in Toronto. I was a city Indian, but I didn't even know I was an Indian, you know? So I had this whole journey, and my life has been so authentically immersed in Algonquin communities, Mi'kmaq communities out in Nova Scotia. So it's really important to note that I wouldn't have the capacity to carry the bravery that I have and to speak upon the things that I have if I didn't authentically have my life completely 180 or 360, whichever one, and find the circle and learn actually about drumming and dancing and the origins of the dances and meeting other people from other nations across this country. That at 23 years old was the catalyst to who Josée is today, because the Josée before that is a whole other person. Yeah.
And I think about that little José that didn't have maybe the proper representation in the media because people like you were not on those stages opening up for the Backstreet Boys or being able to, have that type of mainstream presence that some of the doors and barriers that you've knocked down now to where like other, the contemporary Jose's that are, flipping through the channels, they see representation of themselves, which is so powerful, especially now as we shift gears. Again, we talk about the authenticity. I mean, we've had painted Indians in media for a long time, but to be able to have the authentic storytelling, I think has a whole different type of audience impact.
I would
So
say
how,
I would say I was born in 1984. Um, in the early 90s. I don't know if you guys would know this, but you know the show Northern Exposure.
yes.
There was also North of 60, and North of 60 had a really strong cast of Native actors that this show had like 12 seasons. So over the years, like Tina Keeper, Graham Greene, Alan Jackson, all these guys, Tantu Cardinal, all of them, Nathaniel Arcan, all these actors, they all came from north of 60. So here I am, this little city girl who like kind of sort of learned that she had a super brown Indian looking father that she never really met before. And that's why she's kind of sort of brown. And in the city walking in Toronto, unfortunately, all the native people that you see are in a bad way on the street.
Yeah.
It's just fucking facts, So here we are then looking at a TV screen after you just walked home from school. And everyone you go to school with in a big multicultural city like Toronto, you got Greektown, Little Italy, you have every single representation of the entire world in your classroom. But everybody walks the same path to school. And what do they see about Indians? I don't even have to say, we know. It's sad. So it was either that or it was this like small little group of like lucky Indians who got on the show, and they're far, far, far away. There was no representation anywhere that was like attainable around me unless I got on a Greyhound bus, which I did by myself, and started to travel to the reservation from Toronto to Golden Lake on a Greyhound bus and come to the powwow. And I started to see like all these beautiful Native people who they were so brown and they had so much beadwork and they were speaking their language and they had kids with them and they had these trailers with them and they were like on the road dancing, and it just made it was like a saving, because if I didn't have that knowing of that something else, that other way of life, that natives existed, I mean, I would have suffered even more than I did. But because I learned of that knowing, it saved me a little bit.
Yeah, I think about the trade-offs, and you have a different type of upbringing and background to really kind of have that 30,000 square foot view on what that looks like for Little Thunder versus your upbringing being rooted in the landscape of your ancestors. I think of that with my sons because at a really early age, when my children were very, very small, I was on this different professional path where I was like, I'm moving out to Washington, D.C. I'm going to be a professional Indian. I've got my degree, freshly minted. And it was probably about 9 months in where I realized this is not the type of trade off and sacrifice. Being born and raised, res girl, I kind of was realizing that there's, a lot of sacrifices that, you can't relearn. But you just shared with me a very, I guess, it's like, you know, the roots and reconnecting. It happens at different phases and journeys of different people. I know of people that are born and raised on the res who really still don't get it.
Mhm.
So I appreciate you sharing that, because as I'm just like listening to you, I'm like, huh, I had it all wrong,
Yeah.
but that's what I realize is it's the journey. Your
Yes.
journey, has been yours, and it was what made you decide you wanted something different for your son.
Hmm. Hmm.
So what does, being, in Algonquin territory, how does that, now cause you to have a different kind of balance with your career? I mean, because you're very much immersed into media, arts, television, still dance. What does that look like now that you're on the reserve and not in the city?
I mean, I living in the city, I was struggling. I mean, unless we're talking about when I was 13, 14, 15, 16, modeling while trying to go to high school and having this like totally otherworldly experience that we don't got time today to even get into. But I mean, after that, some stuff went down. I had to make some crazy decisions because some crazy stuff happened because it's a crazy industry. And then, I had to survive in another way. So that meant grinding in the city, like working in the cosmetics department of Shoppers Drug Mart, or, bartending, all these different things I had to do to survive. So it wasn't until I left the city and because I had entered the circle, because I had gone to a powwow, my very first powwow, the first day I was there, the first hour I was present, I got snagged. And then my son's father. And the next 7 years of my life was a vortex of ending up in Mi'kmaq territory out in Nova Scotia, and completely separate of anything he had to do with. His community and his family were so rich in their Mi'kmaq language and culture, and they were all sun dancers. They all had Sundance family from Pine Ridge Valley, South Dakota. You know, so my life went from slinging drinks in a bar to going to the powwow circle, kissing that life goodbye, meeting him, moving to Nova Scotia, and Sweat Lodge became a daily thing in my life. Literally
Mm.
overnight. I wasn't meant to be in the city. I was going to die. Something crazy was going to happen. I was going to become a statistic. I was going to make bad decisions. I was going to be stuck in poverty. It was just set in stone. So I got out. That's what happened.
Yeah, the language and tradition, in practice, in immersion in community is one thing. But when we look at that on the mainstream, is that something that you still think is a challenge with like some of the authenticity and the work that you're doing? Because you're saying this, and I can picture like, okay, your former snag, he may have had all of that, but he doesn't have maybe what it would take to be on the big screen. So how do you really see that we can do a better job of engaging like the non-indigenous audiences to reach into our communities and
From
really
my
bridge that authenticity?
Yeah, and from my experience of especially meeting non-Indigenous people, I mean, they either have an active, sincere willingness to be educated because they are aware that just from year after year getting older on this planet, there's a lot of things that they've been lied to about, or that there's things that are more true than they thought. And they want to be educated by authentic voices. Then you also have other people who will do anything to make sure that our voices are not heard, because then we discredit their colonizing claims of what it all comes down to is land ownership at the end of the day, is the ultimate sole source of power. Everything that is political at the end of the day comes down to that some way or another. And so I think, you know, all we can do is continue. I mean, look at Tyler Sheridan. He's telling, he's doing a more, I don't know everything, but he's doing a job. He's taken a position at including Indigenous point of view and story and actors more than any other director or producer. I'm not saying the guy's perfect or anything. I don't know enough, but I'm just using this as an example. And he's non-native. He's maybe using his privileged platform to insert these storylines, whereas other producers and directors are simply deciding to continue the powerful narrative of the story lens to go through the colonizers' views, right?
Oh yeah,
So
no, that's the perfect example where in mainstream media, the land tenure conversation being brought into a show like Yellowstone or programs like Landman, kind of really put that juxtaposition about why we still have a lot of the social and economic conditions that we do now. But then it makes me think like, okay, so are Indians only in the media because there are typecasted roles just for Indigenous peoples? So it causes me to think, looking forward, like what kind of stories do you want to see increase about Indigenous people and communities that you think are still missing from the mainstream media?
I have a dark soul. I'm a Scorpio. I want the deepest depths of meaning in the universe possible of infinity. So with that said, I don't like Disney. I don't like surface talk. I don't like things that are palatable. I don't want you to be comfortable. You're going to sit and you are going to experience something. So I would encourage the raw, the in your face truths, but done through storytelling that takes the brain on an adventure. And I'm trying to learn that I want to write. I want to learn how to write so bad, and I need to learn how to not like have a big like journal blob, you know. Anyways, so I think that if we and theater, I love theater so much, and theater is such a classic medium of reaching the masses, especially in community, more so than television and
Yes.
film. I just think that, you know, it's hard to say with the way the world is at this immediate moment. It's really, really, really difficult because I almost want to say, like, did we just have a moment and now it's all over? Or is this just there's a longevity and this is just the going through it? Like, are we just going through some questioning times? Are we going to still keep having the same explosion of representation to the point where down the road, 10 years from now, it becomes a little bit normalized? The gap gets fixed a little bit. The I don't like to use the word equality for a lot of reasons, but do things get leveled out?
Yeah.
So that's what I'd have to say on that.
Yeah, I see that with the staying power of some of our relatives that started out very similar to how you did with a role, in your journey, and then it expanded out. Gary Farmer, a good example of that, with his pathway into, being an actor and then seeing a need, in the radio broadcast area. And that's usually what happens is it's not like squirrel, squirrel, distraction. It's like you see so much need in other areas. And if you have, talent or a skill set that can help in that, that's why we all get spread so
Mhm,
thin so
mhm.
quickly in the work that we do. I know that that's the case with you. I know it is
Well,
because of the lack of representation of Indigenous voice and Indigenous women voice specifically in plant medicine reform. That's I experienced that greatly here. And so looking forward with that type of a reality, how do you pace yourself and what do you do for Jose's self-care aside from having a relationship with the plant
yeah, I mean,
or
cannabis
including?
definitely has always played. I mean, because I'm pretty open and honest. Like as an artist, just my natural life path, like I don't have a big entourage of people around me. You know, I don't have a big group of friends. I'm very solitary. I have like, one-off kind of friendships here and there. So I travel. I'm basically alone 99% of the time, especially since my son's been overseas for high school. So yeah, I spend a lot of time alone. And I think that's a blessing because I can't say that my time is so divided for other people anymore. Also, I mean, like less than 2 years ago, I was working for the local school board here in the Indigenous Education Department, had a disaster of an experience and completely bad timing while I also severely injured my shoulder, like really badly. Tore my labrum, tore my attaching rotator cuff muscles. It turned into frozen shoulder. It took 2 years to heal. And in that, I was going through the misery of this job, traveling over an hour and a half one direction to
Wow.
get to some of the schools I had to go to, all to be thrown in the circus of what it's like to work in Indigenous education as an Indigenous person. It is actually the most dangerous place for us to
Oh,
be. I gained 30 pounds. I was completely living a stagnant life because I was under chronic pain. I wasn't sleeping properly because of the pain. Um, it all added up. I was depressed. Let's just get to the point. I was freaking depressed. And had to take some serious action. At the same time, I was actually fired from said job. I mean, surprised that that would happen in a situation. Not. So it was kind of a blessing in disguise because then I had a big buffer of time to just shut down to zero. And I went through all of the stages that needed to be go through to get out of depression and to get into my body again. And the universe has your back when you are authentically declaring to the world what it is that you want. And I started booking acting roles for the first time in my journey since I had started almost 3, 4 years prior, getting an acting coach and going through the grind of it all and getting very discouraged, which happens to all of us. But if you're a survivor, you stick through stuff. So when it comes to self-care, it's just I've been through so much and I've seen so much about alcohol and drug addiction that I know when to shut up and stretch. I know when to take a bath. I know when to tell my partner, like, you need to take me out on a date. We need to go have some fun, you know? Um, just asking for what it is that you need. Literally asking for it and making sure that you have some money set aside so that you can take care of yourself in situations where, you know what? Bills are tight right now, but if I don't get a massage and move this stagnant energy and liquid stuck in my fascia, I'm gonna kill somebody. Go get the massage.
The story that you just shared reminded me of when I lived and worked in Washington, D.C., and there was like no sweat lodge anywhere. And I really felt like I was
Mm,
walking around like ready to cut somebody because I
mhm,
just needed to get into my lodge. And I would go
mhm,
home to Idaho once a month just for a sweat lodge from Washington, D.C. So I understand what you mean about like
mhm.
having to build in that self-care, a part of that, just kind of like just kind of knowing when you need that reset or that balance. But yeah, you have to plan for your self-care in this rapid, paced, crazy high-tech
Mhm.
world where we're still just, I think, finding that balance and that struggle of what you had mentioned earlier. Is this a moment or is this something that we can have as staying power?
Mhm.
I always, and I've brought this up in a couple of prior interviews that I've done, because a pivotal moment that I noticed that was a big cultural shift or change that I think is a factor to that was the COVID pandemic. That it really did, like so many people that used to seek permission for things that were
Mhm.
based in
Mhm.
nature. Like they're no
Yeah.
longer seeking permission to heal
Mhm.
themselves, to be
Mhm.
authentic and reclaim their identity. And so I do believe that the more Taylor Sheridans of the world that we have that are non-indigenous allies to step up and fill that void, so that the Sterling Harjos of the world can backfill it with authentic voice and
Mhm.
taking the story outside of, you know, just because it's an indigenous role, we have to typecast an indigenous person to, this is just a mainstream storyline about an indigenous family.
Yeah, 100%. And I have yet to experience, those types of options of castings. I would say over the years that I've submitted self tapes, they've been 95% for sure, Indigenous roles, but they certainly have not been based in stereotypes. They've been very diverse. They've been very integral parts of the storyline. I look very forward to the work that's going to be coming out in April with Bon Cop, Bad Cop, where probably shouldn't say what the role is, but it's a reoccurring character in the series whose storyline intersects with the storyline of an actor who is one of the most well-known Indigenous actors in the industry. And we may have interesting things that happen together.
I am so excited about and can you just share with everybody when that premieres?
On Crave TV in April. That's all I know so far. It'll be the first season of the show Bon Cop, Bad Cop, which is an adaptation of a two-part movie that came out, I believe, even 20 years apart from its original, 10 or 20 years apart. It became a huge pop culture film in Canadian pop culture. And there's the original actor, Colm Fiore, who's actually in Landman now, and David Bouchard, who is a very, or sorry, Patrick Huard, who is a very famous actor in Canada from Quebec.
So, do you still get jitters and nerves and like all of the butterflies in your belly when you go to auditions, or have you locked in your audition process to where you go and just feeling so
No, not at
amazingly
all.
confident?
No, no. Perfect example. Because of COVID, changed everything. So whereas before, the grind of being an actor is that you had to get yourself to auditions. But that shifted so severely with COVID. And I only got an acting coach in mid 2021. So it took, I had an audition right off the bat, and it's just how things goes. It was to play a role of something that I was quite comfortable in doing, believe it or not. And it couldn't have been a more perfect role for my very first audition. And the tape actually skipped right on through to the director's table. And they were emailing me, asking me if I had a valid passport and this, that, and the other, because it was COVID. This little asshole over here didn't have an updated passport, nor did I even have a clue how to use my J Treaty status. I lost out my very first audition. And you want to know what? That was for the movie Fancy Dance.
Oh, ouch.
Yep. So that, that was a weird experience to like start off on in the industry. And then after that, I mean, like I could have a whole sad list of of roles that I submitted to, and nothing. Be like texting my agent, be like, so I guess it's a no. Like 4 days later, and she's like, yeah, obviously. Next. Anyways, and then I got my first role doing a very small part, 4 lines, but it was for an Apple TV series that just came out, The Last Frontier. It's an amazing show, super high budget, big, huge cast. Dallas Goldtooth is one of the main actors in it. And I got to be on location in the mountains for an entire week just for one day on set, made a really good amount of money to make me understand what the capacity is, even as an actor who gets 4 lines, right? And so then that kind of was like, this is all worth it, actually.
So how
If
many
you can get,
lines to get the
sorry.
card? How many lines to get the card?
It's not necessarily lines, it's days on set. So
Okay.
every day on set you get a credit. So because I had done like documentary stuff, I was getting like all these half credits over the years. And then this Apple TV series, The Last Frontier, gave me like 2 full credits. And then that solidified my full ACTRA membership, so that when I booked Bon Cop, Bad Cop, I was coming in as a full ACTRA member. So there's lots of things to look forward to if this show does well down the line. But with this audition, it was a bilingual one. And I'm just fortunate that moi je parle français aussi parce que je viens du Canada. Quand j'étais née, je parle premier français. Donc I can speak very good French. And it just all worked out. So here we are now. I have this happening. I have a theater play that I'm going to be jumping into, like 8 weeks of rehearsal with the National Arts Center coming up soon, which nobody's supposed to know that yet. And after that, life is a mystery. No idea where my next dollar is coming from. No idea where. I don't know. It is actually 2026 for me is the year of actually being in the grind as a full-time artist who has no 9 to 5, absolutely no paycheck. This is it.
You just make me like I'm always an optimist, and so when I'm thinking about the journey that you've been on, and I hear it and I realize there's so many areas. Like you shared that there was nobody really to kind of help mentor you along this pathway. So my young daughter, she's 12, absolutely, stunning, Indigenous, Thai, mixed blood, and she wants to be a model. And I've had so many people say, do not put her into that industry. It is toxic for young Indigenous women. And I thought, well, if she had a mentor that just had been down a pathway that could help keep my daughter from going. And so I'm thinking like, the services, the professional services catalog from your background that you have that could really grow into so many different tentacles, cannabis, non-cannabis, mainstream media related. I mean, casting, a casting director, you would be amazing as a casting director.
Thank you. Mary Jane, I really appreciate all of that, but there's something that I don't have. I don't have a business drive. And people might be like, what are you talking about? But like, I could care less to own a business. Like, you know what I mean? Like, I don't have it in me. Like my person that I am, I'm a performer. I'm
I
a
love that.
I'm a like I deliver something physical, some type of movement, or like
Yes.
some sort of dialogue, but like the business side of business, like it's not me. So I could never own my own business. I would have to buckle up and like take some courses and like my life would have to kind of like sort of depend on it to like have that motivation, I think, and I'm
Yeah.
just not
You're
there
like,
yet.
pro
But
formas and spreadsheets, no.
I mean, I'm just filling in that intake form. I was like, "Oh, right, I guess so." Like, I hate anything to do with the computer.
That's
Anyways,
what,
but
yes, no, that is amazing though, because, to be able to really know yourself, and we don't always know ourselves at an earlier age to know when to say no or not
Mhm.
right
Oh,
now.
I got no problem saying no. But Mary Jane, I just wanted to say something, because to bring that up and to not say something, there would be a lot of other people that probably feeling they're in a similar situation where they're trying to like understand and navigate the modeling industry. Not to get into like a big long conversation about it or anything, but the word model has really diluted over the years to fit better the diversity buckets of categories of marketing that have expanded. To truly be a model of the expectations in which the young people are trying to compare themselves to, you would have to ask your kid, are you talking about high fashion, like real editorial modeling, or the diluted version of influencer stuff, getting brand deals? Like, very, very important to understand. And when we go the editorial high fashion route, it is just facts. You have to have certain measurements, heights, look, personality. Availability is a thing that people don't take into consideration with their kids. Are you, Mary Jane, going to drop every single thing you have on your calendar with barely 2 days' notice to drive her to New York to do a test shoot? Because where are you at? In Idaho? Sorry, girl, maybe LA. Sorry, let's go the other way. LA would be closer. You get what I'm saying? There's no photographers in
Absolutely.
Idaho that are turning your daughter into a supermodel overnight. Okay, so the parents are actually the vessel of creating the possibilities, and then the kids are showing up having to be the professional to deliver, right? So you have to really back up the bus to consider those things. And that's just what I'll say on that, is a good beginning place to understand what it is that our kids are talking about when they say they want to be models. Do they even know who Cindy Crawford is? If you don't, then you don't want to be a model. So, and then the availability and understanding where you are on the map and how that makes sense.
Yeah, that is a huge responsibility. And I think about that with the balance of just everything that young people have in their lives. And right now, it is just, we think about that, the families that are on the powwow trails balancing academia. Is there room for athletics in there? And then, yeah, it's always about, just trying to find some harmony. And then when you throw littles into the mix, as a single mom for so long myself,
Mhm.
it was very, very challenging. And now, I mean, my oldest son is 23, and I am just, I guess, amazed at the journey that we all go through together. But I guess more importantly, like, I sometimes take a step back. I'm like, I did that. I did that, and it is
Mm.
kind of like pinch myself kind of moments, with realizing how resilient we are as Indigenous women, because we're just doing the
Absolutely.
thing, always just doing and giving and putting out.
Mhm.
Thank you so much for sharing about your, what you give and what you put out, to be able to find your balance. Like, what are some of the as we think about, like, just, vision planning forward with, the work that we're doing together, what are some of those areas that you really see, for Josée in 2026, aside from work, aside
Mhm.
from, like, what are some of those other things that you want to do to restore some of that balance for you?
Um, I mean, on a very personal note, without getting too deep into it, the decision to send my son abroad for high school has turned out to not unfold in the way one would want as a co-parent. So, because of another parent's actions, I now have to completely make some drastic decisions that are going to affect my life, and they are going to affect the momentum that I've created for myself, especially recently.
Thank you again for joining us at Her Many Voices Gaia Gossip. Remember, whatever you do for another, you do for yourself. For more information, head over to hermanyvoices.org to learn more about other programs and get involved. From all of us at Gaia Gossip and Her Many Voices Foundation, thank you, and until next time.